Welcome to the Success Revenue Podcast, the only podcast in the Middle East that brings you leaders in customer success, account management, sales, and go to market to share ideas, perspectives, and valuable learnings on how to successfully drive revenue, delight customers, and take it to the next level.
We are your co-host. I'm Haidar Al-Saad, CEO of RevSetter, the AI agent platform. And with me, I have my amazing co-host, Ivy Ferrero, CS executive, leader, and advisor. And we're excited to bring you a long list of amazing guests during this season of the Success Revenue Podcast. And today is no exception. We're going to speak to someone that is not just a founder, CEO, and business leader, but has long experience from driving a high impacting brands through SEO and through his agency. Some of the takeaways that we'll discuss is how content and SEO is changing in the advent of AI and AI technology. We'll speak about the importance of authentic and human-led brands in this new age of technology and AI. And we'll also talk about some of the nuances and specifics when it comes to driving good SEO, good brand, and good content in the Middle East region, whether that's through English or Arabic speaking content. Ivy, super excited for today's conversation. It's kind of a different avenue. We've talked a lot of, CS, of course, sales, go to market, etc. But today we're going to really dig into how brands and companies can position themselves, be found, and get their brand to that next level. So I'm very excited about today's conversation.
Me too. I am so excited. And I just feel like our most recent newsletter that got published, by the way, for anybody that is listening that has not signed up for a newsletter, please make sure to sign up. You will get some incredible information on a weekly basis pertaining AI, and it's pertaining for revenue leaders. But what I find very interesting is that we used to have a lot of businesses used to compete for getting a lot of reviews. And normally when you would go on Google, those would be the top results that would rank on top. But I find it very, very interesting that we are having to forget SEO ranking, and that now like the most important thing, and I heard this in the Diary of the CEO when they had this one guest that talks about how we are moving from the skilled labor economy to actually the intellectual property economy, which is all about like anything that you write, whether it's like long form or short form, any videos, any podcasts, even writing a book, and how these essentially what is going to happen now is that it's going to help you because we're moving from SEO ranking to AI driven search. So I find that to be very interesting that now all of these like links and intellectual property become so important for us. And now even more than ever, having a personal brand is so important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Ivy. We were talking about this, and when I look at searching for something, you go to the AI engines. You go less and less and less to Google. I need to figure out something. I go to ChatGPT or Claude or one of the other providers and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to solve. This is what I'm trying to find. And it gives you the step-by-step, the instructions versus going, click into a bunch of links, trying to find everything and do it. But that has that effect, just like we had we spoke about in the newsletter, that people are clicking, web traffic into website is going down. I saw just yesterday Wall Street Journal and New York Times, and I think it was another big outlet in the US were reporting something like 53% of their web traffic had dropped in the last 12 months or so because people are not going directly to the sources anymore. They're using these different AI searches. So I'm really curious to hear how that is impacting how businesses approach the way that they position themselves, the content that they put out, the SEO, the branding, with our guest today, because he obviously has extremely high knowledge and experience when it comes to this. So can't wait to dig in and jump into the conversation with him today, Ivy.
Yes, I'm so excited. Should we bring him in?
Let's do it. I think we're going to be a good conversation. So let's get it started.
Okay, amazing. Here we go.
All right, everyone, welcome to today's episode. We are so excited to have James Reynolds on with us today. James is the CEO and founder of SEO Sherpa, a global award-winning agency for SEO. He's also a Search Personality of the Year winner himself. James brings a ton of experience from the SEO and agency space, of course, but also as a contributor to several different media outlets, for example, Forbes and Entrepreneur Middle East, and has a wide range of knowledge and experience that we'll dig into in today's conversation. James is also based here in Dubai with Ivan and myself, so we're excited to jump into today's conversation. James, welcome on the podcast. We are very excited for today. Ivan's told me a ton about you, and can't wait to dig into a lot of the stuff that we're going to touch on today.
Yeah, and thank you both for the invitation. Super happy to be here and to go wherever this conversation may take us this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Amazing. And James, we always love to kind of start off with getting to know our guests a little better for our audience. So why don't we do that? Give us a little bit of your background. You have a fascinating story. You've had a great career so far in terms of what you do, what you've been able to build up. So why don't you start us off there? Tell us about yourself, your background, kind of what took you to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you. So born and raised in Middle England, was the son to a copywriting father and an artist mother.
There we go.
So have creativity in my genes. Grew up being super passionate about sport. I played for a professional rugby club called Northampton, and that was my life up until the age of around 20 or 21. After a couple of failed tries at college, I ended up finding my way into a photography company, which took me into the role of general management and then eventually into sales and marketing. And sales and marketing is where I cut my teeth throughout my 20s. Took that small business, which was a husband and wife photography company, from literally two people plus me to a 50-person business here in Dubai. And eventually then sidestepped out of that company and decided to put all of my skills and learnings over the last decade to good use, and started off in a consultancy firm. And I used to sell, digital marketing services like SEO and website development and Google AdWords, and then eventually segued that into an SEO agency in 2012. And that's the agency SEO Sherpa that you mentioned at the top of the podcast. And I've been growing that for the last decade and a little bit now. We're 65 people strong. We are in 3 countries. We're here in the UAE. We're also in Singapore and the US. And we deliver search everywhere optimization to, fast growth startups and Fortune 500 companies all over the world now.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that background and just the way that you've been able to leverage what you've done operationally, right? Tying into what you're doing today. You've kind of lived it, marketing, the sales, the SEO, yourself, seeing how that as an operator goes. I would love to tell us a little bit more about SEO Sharper. You gave us kind of the high level where you guys are, size, everything else. But tell us a bit more, like how do you guys help your customers? Speak to us about kind of the work that you're doing, about kind of your role within all this as the managing partner, obviously, and founder.
Yeah, so historically, we've always been an organic search agency. So what that has meant in the past is that we've been helping brands primarily rank on Google search, along with being Yahoo and the primary traditional search platforms. Nowadays, we are what we describe ourselves as a search everywhere optimization agency. A term that we are trademarking. And that basically means that we now help our clients get found on any platform where customers happen to be searching. If we'll think about our own search habits these days, they probably extend beyond Google, right? So we might be using AI platforms, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, and others, but we may also be searching on vertical search engines like Amazon or Reddit or even TikTok or Instagram. So where we operate now is at the hub of this, and depending on where a client's core market is, we will be helping them get found. And obviously along with that, then hopefully generating them some business, which really ties into the conversion aspect of what we do, which is all built around conversion rate optimization.
Wow, fantastic, James. And as someone who's been writing about digital marketing for over a decade, how have you seen content strategy shift in the past 3 years?
I mean, I would I would say that like historically, content marketing meant blogging. Writing long form content, posting it to your website, optimizing it for a bunch of target keywords, and then distributing it everywhere that you possibly could. Right. So like that might mean splintering the content down and posting it on Facebook or LinkedIn or anywhere else. That was pretty much a typical B2B content marketing strategy in the past. How things have changed now is that really that kind of long form pillar content style sort of content marketing approach no longer works. I would say two primary reasons why that's the case. The first is that Google is sending far less traffic than it used to. So whereas the past you used to perform a search as a consumer and you would be displayed, 10 blue links typically on the page, the searcher would then click on the most relevant link and they'd find themselves up on a website, right? Hence bringing the brand, traffic to their domain. Nowadays, what we're seeing is that most searches, and it's 60% plus now, are what we describe as zero-click searches, where Google is actually answering that query directly within the search results itself. And that could be in a variety of different ways. It could be in the form of, featured snippets. It could be through various tools, things like calculators, weather displays, those types of things. And then more recently, it could be in AI overviews. So now kind of thinking about, building content to drive traffic to our website is probably not a smart move because that sort of flow of traffic is going to get less and less as time goes by. I think the second component to it is as well that if we think about like platform strategy and distributing content, people go to different platforms for very different sort of needs or requirements now, right? Things that work, for instance, on Instagram are very like curated content formats. On TikTok, it's almost the opposite, as raw and like unedited as possible. Typically works best. Like LinkedIn's very story driven, Facebook's very opinion driven. You can't just take one piece of content now and just like literally distribute it everywhere. You have to think very much platform centric. So I think it's become actually a lot harder these days than it was in the past. If you're trying to do too much, I think really where we should be as brands now is thinking about identifying maybe one or two key platforms and really looking to master those. Again, whichever's most relevant for the brand, but don't try and be everywhere for everyone, but dominate one or two platforms and let your customers spread your content everywhere else.
Wow, that is fascinating. And James, when it comes down to the type of form, whether it's like short format or long format, what would you say is over or underrated today?
From a search perspective, I would say long form content is underrated. Now, you may say to yourself, look, I don't go and read 3,000 or 4,000 word blog posts anymore, right? It's like,
Yeah.
Other ways to take bite-sized consumable content to maybe answer burning questions or needs that I have at that particular time. But what long form, highly authoritative content does is it builds thematic relevance for you as a brand, which helps you rank better in Google search. And it also builds up a huge amount of authority, which may not bring you eyeballs, but it will do things like bring you links to your website because people always want to cite the most reputable sources. And that has spillover effects into other traffic channels, particularly Google search, but also into just generally building your authority wherever you may appear.
No.
Wow. What I find fascinating about this, James, is that before we were very obsessed about like businesses about like getting reviews on Google, and everybody was trying to figure out how to get reviews. But as we're moving away from that, and now it's this whole AI driven search, what it seems to appear that the one thing that is most important is to have some sort of like intellectual property out there, whether you're writing blogs or writing a book or being featured in a podcast, which then when, let's say if you're searching your name, if I'm searching your name on ChatGPT and that takes me to like certain links. And I find that to be very fascinating because I feel like now we're moving away from the reviews onto this new way of actually being able to find access or services and whatnot. I wanted to ask you, in regards to all the experience that you've had living and working here in the MENA region, what would you say are some of the unique challenges and opportunities you've observed when it comes down to like SEO and digital growth in this region?
Well, we operate quite extensively in the digital PR space because, to your point earlier, actually performing well in a digital ecosystem is really driven by your brand reputation and your mentions across the web. So, as part of our core service, we're really actively trying to seek mentions and placements on top tier media for our clients. In this region, it's actually quite difficult. And I think it's probably driven by the fact that the media ecosystem is somewhat controlled here. Press can't say everything that they would want to, which kind of limits maybe the stories that they can cover and the angles that they can take and so on and so forth, which makes it sometimes more difficult for us to pitch stories to the press and gain coverage. Also, this is a very commercially driven market. If you approach an editor or a journalist with a great story, their immediate response is, well, how much can I charge you to get that story featured? Rather than actually worrying about, well, what's best for our readership and maybe what might be interesting for the people that we serve. So that's been a challenge for us. We've been developing out our digital PR function for the last 2.5, 3 years, and it's been a real steep learning curve trying to sort of circumnavigate that. So on
Wow.
the challenges side, that one's one that's particularly prevalent for us. In terms of opportunities, I believe the market that we operate in is somewhat of a blue ocean when it comes to multilingual. I say multilingual search, definitely from the position that we standpoint, but I think just generally multilingual marketing as a whole. There's so much opportunity in Arabic. The English market is so overserved, but Arabic, language content is pretty scarce, and when it is done, it isn't done particularly well. So I think those brands that can serve the Arabic speaking market, if they can nail their content strategy in Arabic, they can really be ahead of the curve. And I would say equal to that, just from where we stand in the UAE, being able to serve adjacent markets is really powerful as well. We're having a huge amount of success serving Saudi, Qatar, Kuwait from the UAE. And in those markets, they're not necessarily particularly developed. So some of the things that we could roll out here, or certainly in the US or, the East Asia market where we operate would be quite, let's say, commonplace. In this market, they're probably pretty rare and somewhat advanced. So if you can, nail those markets, you can be probably ahead of the curve versus many others that operate there.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, I think that aspect of the underserved Arabic population when it comes to marketing, content across industries is a huge opportunity. But I want to take it back one step, James, because I think it was fascinating as we were talking about how things have changed, right, when it comes to how businesses need to approach SEO, the different types of content, different ways of searching, accessing information. I was speaking to a friend yesterday, and it was a business colleague and a friend, but we were talking about, I remember the topic specifically, and I said, hey, you should check this thing out. He went to Google, started searching, couldn't really find what he wanted, went to ChatGPT, found everything he needed in like 2 seconds, right? And he almost never go to Google anymore. And same, I think, for a lot of people, you kind of go to whatever your preferred AI engine is, you go ask it there. And then I saw also that Google's CEO, he just spoke about this just the other day, that they're going to be leaning into AI overviews and AI search and moving away from traditional. Obviously, they're kind of making it so right away you can get to what you need without the websites, which as a consumer, I think is really interesting, right? You get access to information faster. You get what you need summarized. You don't need to search for it in the same way as before. But on the flip side, from a business perspective, where I see a risk, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is that the number of sources or pieces of information or options that you get will actually become very limited, because it will be what is the model trained on, what has authority. So startups, growth scale, or different types of content information will kind of be suppressed in that order, right? Because the algorithm decides what is it that we're floating up, what is it we're talking about. How do you look at that risk? Because I feel that that could be something that's very unintended. We want things faster, but now we're limiting. Because if you go to different search engines today, you see everything. You can kind of decide. I always skip over the sponsored stuff. I start going down, and then I look at, find whatever I need. Whereas in search, you
Yep.
get the same 3 answers from every AI engine today. So how do you see that transpiring?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, actually, what we're seeing is that currently the different models are surfacing very different results by and large, which is super interesting. I think their seed data set and where they're taking their citations from at the moment seems quite varied, which makes things more complex for us as search practitioners. Um, but yes, you're right. I mean, really what's happening at the moment is that consumers are kind of outsourcing their research process entirely to AI. And I think there is definitely a place for that in certain ecosystems. But like generally speaking, especially when someone goes through very sort of deep and considered decision making processes, the more sources of information that they're exposed to, generally the better. They can make a much more informed decision then, right? If they're able to do so. So I see where there is risk, there's also opportunity. So those people that can really master it, I think, are the ones that are going to succeed long term. It's definitely a sort of a market that we're trying to really sort of work out. And I don't think anyone necessarily has found the right middle ground. I would say Google's probably the closest, because with Google, at least you've got the AI answer typically, but then you've also got sort of supporting that various other research sources that consumers can then go and explore themselves. I
Yeah.
think where there is risk, as you said, is with the native platforms like ChatGPT, where typically they're going to serve 3-5 suggestions perhaps, and that's really limiting the reach of anyone else who may want to appear there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And like you said, whereas there's risk, there's always opportunity. So it's about how you find and balance that. And, as someone, I'm curious also on this, James, because I spent myself, previous my career, 9 years at Meltwater, which is a global media intelligence company.
Mm,
You might be familiar with them. So
yeah.
PR, marketing professionals, I've worked with them all, from Fortune 500s, 100s, all the way down to the small mom and pop shop, and just always interested to see those kind of how that's done and the different ways that they approach it. And I'm curious, kind of in this world of AI that we're all in, and someone that's a founder of an AI company, I love everything AI. I believe in kind of that will be the future. But one thing that I find interesting too, in terms of brands and PR and kind of how they will approach it, I'm curious to see if you're seeing this or if you believe it will happen more. And Mark Cuban was talking about this the other day, that when everything becomes AI, the importance of the human interaction becomes much more prevalent. And we see so much AI content out there. You can kind of spot when something's done with AI, which it's not a bad thing, but it's just different, right? From a PR perspective, how do you see the human story and that part play a bigger role in terms of how brands position themselves and try to get that authority, but also that emotional connection to the consumer, to their customers?
Yeah, it's going to be incredibly important, right? Because if we're all just relying on AI content, we're all essentially regurgitating the same publicly available information that every other publisher out there is pushing out themselves. So I think that sort of unique perspective, that story, that opinion that someone going through that situation could draw from is going to be way more important than ever before. One, for just building connection with the target audience being one, but also again, like just thinking about how we approach things from an SEO standpoint. um, if we can't display sort of unique opinion or thought leadership, or have like a human perspective on something through our content, we're never going to rank, because what have we got to offer that other brands haven't got to offer? So I think that's really, really, really important. And when we are now approaching content strategies for our own brand and with our clients, it's always like, how can we interject not just the fact that we can get from AI, but the unique opinion and story around that from our client's perspective is what's really going to help us stand out, connect with the audience, and ultimately help us rank better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And extending on that, I'm kind of thinking like, do you have any core principles, right, that is kind of guiding for you in terms of building high performing search first brands out there? Do you guys have a few core principles that you try to apply? And every business is different, but from your perspective, they're really important to drive high impact and high performance brands.
Yeah, from a content perspective, there's a few sort of tenets that, yeah, we definitely lead on. First one's just exceptional standards. We pride ourselves on being the best of the best, but from the same token, if we're going to help our clients stand out within a very crowded marketplace, we have to go to market with the best possible content that we ever possibly could, because it's that content that ultimately is going to rise to the surface. Right? Google wants to rank the very best content, the most informative, the most engaging, the most visually driven, the one with the greatest depth. That should be the content that we put forward. And we describe that as 10x content. Whatever is
Nice.
out there at the moment, our objective should be to create something that's 10x better, because it will be then very obvious to both consumers and to search engines that that content ultimately should perform best within search results. A second principle we have is just long-term thinking. It's really foregoing, short-term, success for long-term gain. That has to be a mindset really in SEO, because really there's no long-lasting short-term wins, not
Right.
unless you want to play with fire, so to speak, as far as the algorithms are concerned. So we're always thinking about what is the best long-term move to build brand reputation, because ultimately, again, that's going to create a strong moat for the business that ultimately is going to drive them in many years to come. I would say those would be two ones. Of course, there's plenty of tactical stuff that we do,
Yeah, of course.
but those two kind of just like general directives are really important to us.
Mm. Interesting. And James, I'm kind of curious. Obviously, you've given us a bit of a glimpse on why you ended up in SEO, and you having a father that was in copywriting and having that creative sort of energy that you grew up with. But what was the thing that kind of shifted in you in 2010 that you were like, okay, I'm going to pursue SEO? And what would you say was a mindset that helped you to scale SEO Sherpa into a global recognized agency?
Yeah, what appealed to me with SEO is the perfect balance of creativity and data. Um, if I was to describe myself, I would say I'm almost split entirely down the middle between kind of left and right brain thinking. I'm, sort of got the artistic, creative side on one side, obviously fueled by my parents, but I'm also a real data nerd as well. And SEO gives me that perfect balance, the opportunity to do creative marketing, but also really like disseminate the data, look at technical stuff, crawling, indexing, all of the sort of the geeky stuff. And that really appealed to my psychology, I guess. The other thing that really drew me to SEO as a business model was the recurring income model. I came from a photography background, as I mentioned, and the model for that business was family portraits primarily. It was probably like 80% of the work that we did. And because people tend to come for family portraits only on special occasions and once every maybe 5 or 10 years, when their kids are growing up, we never had a studio that was booked for more than like 3 or 4 weeks out. So we could only really ever guarantee the revenue for the next 3 to 4 weeks, which is seat of the pants stuff. Like forever we were promoting, like constantly promoting to, fill our books for the next, 3 to 4 weeks to make sure that, we were profitable, we could meet payroll. And that was highly stressful for me as a general manager. So when I got into the consultancy business and I learned between selling websites, which were one-time projects, and SEO, which was recurring retainers, I was like, this recurring retainer model is definitely what I like best, Being able to sell a client once and then collect the revenue over and over and over again, as long as you keep doing a good job. I love that predictable model. So yeah, those two things I think were probably key drivers for me. As to kind of what's driven me, I had a pretty tough sort of first 6 or 12 months when I started my consultancy. Moving out of the photography company, I hadn't been paid for probably 5 or 6 months. I lost 2 properties because I didn't have an income. So actually, I had my back against the wall in a scenario where I really needed to make things successful, and with kind of like a fire up my arse for that first period. I had no other choice but to make it work. I don't know where I would have been if I didn't have that level of pressure upon me, but I think I've realized that I can kind of manufacture maybe a little bit of self-inflicted pressure now to keep things moving forward. But that was definitely, I would say, the slingshot that got the agency moving forward. And I've tried to maintain that sort of mindset. Like, we call it like a day one mindset in the business. Like, consider you are starting out. What decisions would you make if this customer coming in tomorrow was your first and only customer? How would you treat them differently than if you've got, 65, 70 clients like we've got on the books right now? I've tried to maintain a lot of that kind of thinking all the way up until today, where we are right now.
Wow, I love that. We all love that recurring model of revenue for sure. And I would agree with you that, yeah, having that sort of like, I guess, hitting back bottom, it's a catalyst for magic and for you to actually get your quote unquote shit together. And James, I wanted to ask you, what's something most agency founders get wrong when it comes to scaling profitable businesses? And what did you choose to do differently? Is there anything that you can pinpoint?
Yeah, the thing that I would say the majority of agencies get wrong, particularly when it comes to like thinking about scale, is thinking that acquisition drives growth when in fact it's actually retention. If you cannot keep a client for a sustained period of time, you will never grow. And looking at some of the biggest agencies in our space, I'm talking like your Dentsus, your WPPs, these really, really large multi-billion-dollar agency businesses. They typically are working in client cycles of 5 or 10 years at a time. They're really, bringing on businesses and keeping them for a very, very long period. And I think that was certainly a big lesson for me in the early days. I actually sort of wore as a badge of honor very early when I was getting started the fact that we didn't tie clients into long-term contracts. I was like, come with us, we're not going to tie you in for a long time. And I think, from a standpoint of a principle, yeah, it kind of makes sense. But if you want to build something, significant and sizable, you actually do have to set the expectations with clients as to how long it's going to take, and actually enter into a partnership where you are committed for the long term to make sure things are successful. And that's definitely a big lesson that I've learned. So a huge amount of our kind of energy and innovation now is focused around how can we better the client experience to ensure that clients remain a lot stickier for a lot longer period of time. And that covers all sorts of things. I mean, it covers like client servicing, it covers execution and delivery. It covers things like surprise and delight and gifting, and I mean so many things. Like there's all of these different kind of 1% improvements that you can make to keep clients for a longer period. And then whatever you then acquire on top of that is going to build the business, right? It's going to just layer on top of the baseline and foundation that you've already got. And obviously, when you can couple both, like a really great acquisition engine with a really strong retention engine, that's when you're going to fly to the moon. And that's where most businesses should be aiming.
Beautiful. That sounded like music to my ears. Both Hader and I are in the space of customer success, and it's all about that. It's about retaining clients, and it's the whole concept of like you make clients happy, and they'll stay with you, and then they'll buy more. So we absolutely love that. And just out of curiosity, James, is there one specific KPI that you like to track on a weekly basis to keep margins healthy?
Yeah, we're very data driven. So we have critical numbers, and then we have all number of KPIs, OKR metrics, and many things that we're actively tracking. Our four metrics that matter, we call it the 4TM, are retention. Or flip side of that, client churn. So we measure that month over month. We also look at our monthly recurring revenue. So what is our baseline of monthly recurring revenue? And we look at profitability, of course. And then what have I missed? MRR, and then obviously sales acquisition. Those are the four that we actively track. But what's interesting within our business is every single department has KPIs to own. Every single individual has a KPI to own, and every single client has at least 3 KPIs that we're responsible for. So everything is measurable. We always know at any point how successful we are on delivering client promises, how effective the team are on delivering their promises to the company, and how successful we are as an overall organization. Anyone in the company will know that. In fact, today being Monday, we came out of our weekly Kickstart meeting where the whole company gets that information shared with them. So everyone knows every single week exactly where we're up to in terms of our key performance indicators.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's great. I like that a lot because it creates a very data-driven environment and culture, right? Where you're looking at the data, acting on it, and you can actually make decisions faster and more proactively, especially when it comes to the retention side. As I was saying, we've been in that game for decades, and it's the only way of building and growing a sustainable business if you have any type of recurring model. If you don't have the customers retained and growing with you, you're kind of just putting out fires with more water with acquisition and nothing is growing. So it's definitely, I think, a really nice approach to it. I think maybe one that many agencies might be lacking, where it's very acquisition focused. It's very about getting more people, more customers in the door, and at the same time others are leaving and they're not growing, and kind of figure out like, why is this happening? So I really like that approach. It's more of a systematic, almost kind of SaaS model approach to driving that agency side of it. So kudos on that, James. I think that's a great way of doing it. And kind of thinking about that, because when you talk about it, what I'm thinking is, as a founder as well, you have a very systematic and data-driven approach, and you combine that with obviously your creative side and your work and everything that you do from there. How do you think about the data aspect as well as the optimization aspect when it comes to now with AI and the different technologies that are available? How are you thinking about implementing that into your business, into your workflows, whether that's from a technology standpoint, content, optimization? How are you approaching that? Because that's a hard thing, right, as a leader to decide how far are we going to go towards, leaning into this thing? How much do we wait, especially in terms of a creative business like you guys are in? I'm curious how you think about that as a CEO and as founder, and how you're implementing that in practice today.
Yeah, I mean, we've been on the front foot with AI adoption as much as we've been able to. One, because we've had it very much top of mind in our industry, which is of course adapting heavily with the platforms being more AI driven. It's really at the forefront of our minds. But equally so, we are in a very people heavy business model. I've got 65 staff now, which funnily enough was actually the business model I was trying to get away from when I left the photography company. I was like, on day one, I'm like, I'm not gonna have an office or a large team. I want to work from a laptop and sit on the beach and make money through affiliate marketing. And funnily enough, a decade plus later, I've ended up with a large office and a team. But I guess you kind of, you fall back into what you know best. Yeah. But with that being the case, of course, we're kind of looking to see how we can, supplement, let's say, or become more efficient with the adoption of AI. And we are doing that in a number of different ways. I mean, on the let's say, ground floor, we've developed a lot of tools that have helped us to automate very manual, human-driven processes. So, for example, one thing that SEOs would have to do is write alt text for images historically, which is basically a little bit of text tag that sits with an image that tells the search engine what that image is about. It basically meant a human looking at the image and then writing a piece of descriptive text to label that image. Like, very time consuming. If you can imagine a website that is very dense in images, like a e-commerce store. Well, now we've developed AI to actually read that image and then write the text. And then we can use patching technology to deploy that directly to the website. And we've saved, like hundreds, if not thousands of human hours by adopting that sort of technology. So typically we will look internally, where are we spending our time? And is there a tool that exists already that could do that? Or if not, is there the ability for us within the agency to develop it? The second area we're using AI is for more robust decision making. And this, I guess, is probably where I'm using it more as an agency leader. One example of that would be last year we developed a whole suite which internally we call Basecamp. One of the tools inside Basecamp is what we call the CRPM, which is the client retention prediction model. And what this tool does is it takes data from all of the different data points that we have, like client meetings, whether the client turned up or not, what the sentiment was like on that meeting, how quickly or slowly they're paying their bills, where they are in their contract cycle, how their current KPI performance is, and many, many other factors. And it puts that into a prediction model. And then it will tell us on a risk scale of 0 to 10, how likely the AI believes that that client is going to churn. So what we can do is week over week, we can measure where we've got clients that are scoring higher and getting into the risk zones of like 6 or 7 or even 8 out of 10. And we can get in front of that with preventative actions. So we can get in touch with the client. We can fix issues or further issues before they arise, get on top of performance and try and bring that number down. We were all a little bit skeptical about it to begin with, like how accurate would it be? This thing is crazy accurate to the extent that we've had clients that have hit that risk level of 8 or 9, and then 7 days later we've got that dreaded cancellation email come into our Gmail inbox, and we've like, okay, that's not good, but at least we know the tool works and the AI is accurate.
That's
so
great.
we're now using that much more to kind of get ahead of those things. So it's really great for that. I think when you can give it data sources, it can disseminate that data in ways that is very, very difficult for the human brain to do. And it can actually help you with your decision making processes much more effectively. So we're doing it for that, and then even things like analyzing our sales calls and getting feedback on those, what could we have done better, et cetera, measuring lead quality. We're using it in a bunch of different ways right now.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, and it's just so scalable the way that the AI can do it. Like the human could do it, but it takes a ton of time, ton of effort, ton of resources, whereas the AI can do it in instant seconds. And basically what you were describing essentially is a health score model, but within the context of what you guys are doing. So I love that you're implementing these things, James, and it seems like it's also bearing fruit in terms of efficiencies and productivity gains, which is obviously what you're looking for. And let me ask you this is just something that popped up in my mind now as we've been talking through this conversation. So, and you guys operate in the US as well, so you might be familiar with this example. But right now in the US, for our listeners that don't follow anything in the US, the NBA basketball finals is taking place, and it's 2 different teams playing. So always when these finals happen, right, there's different brands that will be doing different spots on TV, right, commercials. And right now, the typical suspects that you would imagine are doing them, the big brands doing the different commercials for different things, cars and everything else. And spending the usual, $500K, $700K on ad, that's great. And the one that's getting the most attention right now is it's a new financial platform company that the ad is actually performing the best of all of the ads during the NBA finals is this ad. And it's completely generated through AI with a budget of $2,000. And it's outperforming the 500K major brand ads that are happening. It's a very cool video, actually. It's like very crazy, very chaotic, but it ties into everything that you want to see for during this NBA finals. So it's been running throughout the finals, and I was reading about it, and I found it just so interesting that you could get to a great ad that can run in a spot that costs $2,000 to produce, and it's all AI from script to subtitles to creation to everything else, versus the usual production globe, teams and cameras and all that stuff. Like, how do you think about that? That must be a challenge as well. Like when you guys have customers coming in and saying, well, you should be able to do this much cheaper, faster, leverage AI, do these things. What kind of pressure does that put on you from an agency standpoint? And what are your thoughts on that? Because I found it very interesting when I was reading about this and seeing that example. That was very, in real time happening right now over there. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, our mentality has generally been, how can we do now more with less, right? So, if we get less human capital spent on mundane, repetitive tasks, hopefully those human hours can be spent on much more strategic things that are going to drive long-term success. And then we can use tools and AI and functional support like that to actually leverage it into something that's much more impactful. I think that's ultimately where the human capital is best spent now, is on strategic, creative thinking work, and we leave tools and AI to do the execution. How much of it? I mean, in your example with the ad, like how successful is that going to be forever? I'm not too sure. We'll be able to detect that it's AI, and then we're
Yeah,
going to get a bit like blind to it, and then we're going to want to sort of
something different.
sort of
Yeah.
lean back to the lean back to the human aspect again. I don't know. Like everything will probably run its course, right? But yeah, I mean, whilst it can be exploited now, why not?
Yeah, I just found it such a fascinating example. Like you said, it was, and they leaned into the fact that it was all AI generated, so they made it like after it got good traction, made it a thing. But yeah, that's what we talked about earlier, that human versus AI, and I think a lot about, as we think about the AI workforce and the human workforce of the future. I always say, I believe at least the future will be human led, AI powered. That's kind of my little thesis on it. So we'll see how it continues developing.
Yeah,
I
we'll
love
check
that.
back with you in a few years from now and see how it's all played out.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
James, and I'm kind of curious, specifically with building a business in Dubai. Were there any sort of like unexpected lessons that help shape your leadership philosophy in building a business here?
I think we kind of touched on the outcome of one. So when I was an employee, I find myself in the situation where I was second guessing my decision making all the time. And that's because it was never really truly transparent to me, like the real inner workings of the business. So when I was running that photography studio for over a decade, and I was really like, key man number one after the two founders, I never really had full insight into the workings, like the true workings of the business. I mean, yes, the functional workings, operations, yes, but I never knew the financials. And because of that, it was very, very difficult for me to make important decisions backed by true data. And I found that terribly frustrating. I also, found that, you've got people truly invested in the business. They want it to be successful, and they can help it be more successful if they're given, all of that information to them. So that was something that I decided, right, when I go into to business, when I'm going to be the owner, the founder myself, I'm going to lead with radical transparency and make all information available to my employees to cascade decision making down to the front line, because I believe the more information people can have, the better they're equipped they can be at actually making decisions. Um, and that's really proven to be the case. I mean, there's very few decisions that I need to make now other than the really critical, like key, like strategic decisions, and that's the sort of decision I want to be making. I don't want to be worried about, whether it's right to give the client a rebate or a paused month or whatever. Like the team will know that, they understand the financials, they understand the health risk of the client. They can make all of those decisions themselves. So that would definitely be one. probably as a result of actually doing the work that we do. I had a realization several years in that I spend all of this time sort of optimizing client accounts, testing, ad copy A versus ad copy B, testing the different times that we can run ads to see which works better. I had a realization one day. I'm like, why am I not adopting the same mindset to my actual business and testing all of these different things to find the 1% improvements within the actual business and the operational aspects of the organization? And from that, I really got very geeky about this marginal gain theory. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's rooted in the workings of this guy called Sir David Brailsford, who was running the Olympic cycling program for the British Olympics, I think leading up to the London Olympics, maybe sometime before. And he just had this mindset of like, we're going to find the 1% incremental improvements to make our cyclists better. And they would test different lycra shorts. They would test different muscle rubs before they went out, like cycling. They would test the different temperatures of the rooms that they would stay in. They would just find all of these like tiny little like tweaks to make the overall performance better. They weren't looking for these like resounding big wins. They were just looking for these small incremental improvements. And they took the British cycling team from basically being nowhere runs that never won any medals at all to being like the dominant cyclists in the sport. And it was all of this incremental mindset sort of theory. So that's been really successful for us. Last year, we ran a program called the Incremental Games, which was a program that we ran throughout the agency where we essentially gamified the concept of all of the teams trying to find 1% improvements within their own functional area. We had a whole leaderboard and prizes, and the team went out and found the most amazing like innovations. Some of them tiny, some of them huge, but they were all empowered to improve their own function. And it was transformational for the business. And we've adopted that kind of mindset now going forward. And that's all really come out of the fact that, wait a second, we're testing stuff like for our clients. Why are we not testing stuff for ourselves? And that was probably a big one that comes to mind as well.
Oh, I love that. That is so cool. And the last question from me, James, to wrap up. From all this time that you've been running your business, it's been like about 13 years. What sort of habits or routines have helped you to keep yourself focused and resilient?
Yeah, like from a like personal standpoint, maybe some
Yeah.
of the ways that I operate. A few things. I think probably the first one would be this idea of having 12-week years. I read this in a book. I can't remember who wrote it now. Maybe I can cite the author for the show notes afterwards. But it's this concept of really like breaking down a year into 12-week cycles, because when you have short focused sprints, you can achieve so much more than just having these really kind of open long-term deadlines. And the way a 12-week year will work is basically every quarter, you work out what your objectives and key results are going to be, and you give yourself 12 weeks to achieve them. And then you give yourself a 1-week break to reset. So for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been having these kind of cyclical sort of quarterly sprints with then a 1-week break at the end of it. And typically that break will be me literally just going off grid. It could be just going away somewhere for what I call a think week, where I just take a bunch of books and I hide away in a wood cabin. It could be going on some excursion to Peru or somewhere like that and like hiding myself away, but like literally just like getting completely off the grid, not thinking about business and doing a reset. That's been a big one for me. I would say my idea of having make a day and manager days has been a big one for my productivity. A make a day being those days when you're just purely sort of focused in your area of unique ability, when you're producing, building, planning, like just focusing like on the next progression of the business, and then have separate days for all of your managerial stuff, team meetings, checking in with people, speaking to clients, those sorts of things, because it's so difficult, I found, to kind of mix between being in that maker mode where you're building, and then also being in that manager mode where you're looking after people and being responsible and answering questions for them. And I found like really sort of splitting my week up into those two key segments has been very, very helpful. So I do a Wednesday and a Friday maker day, and a Monday, Tuesday, and a Thursday will be my manager days. Yeah, those would be a couple of things. And recently I've got myself really into endurance sports. So doing like marathon running and high rocks has been my like latest obsession. And I've really found that endurance sports is like so good for like mental toughness. If you can, run your way through a really difficult long run, you can cope with anything that's going to get thrown your way in a difficult business day. You know what I mean? So like just building that mental muscle has been a big one for me.
That's great.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, I hear a lot about high rocks now, especially in Dubai. I know a bunch of people like, yeah, I'm all into high rocks now. So that was not new. And
Yeah,
I
I'm one
love
of them. Sorry.
You're one of them. Yeah, yeah, it's all good. It seems to be, everyone I talk to really loves it. They do it. They love it. Seems like a very good way of getting that energy out and competing and kind of taking it to the next level. So I love that. And it's just such a interesting examples that you provided as well. It made me think there's a big design agency. Their founders are from Denmark. They have offices everywhere. They do this thing where they literally work for 4 years and then they take a whole year off. They shut down the agency for a full year, go off the grid, and then come back and then, do another 4 years. So they do this like these 4-year sprints. And every time they come back, they have like new ideas and new inspiration, and they're booked up right away with all the different projects. But it is bigger scale in terms of time wise to what you mentioned. I like that concept of taking some time after really putting in the work during a specific period of time where you're achieving things. I love that. Amazing, James. It's been such a great conversation. And what we love to do to wrap up with our guests is we have this lightning round at the end of our conversations where we'll ask you a few quick questions, quick answers, and then try to process all the good stuff that you've shared with us and the audience today. So, say, James, you ready for a quick lightning round as well here to wrap up?
Yep, let's go.
Excellent. Well, the first question is kind of tailor-made for you, so I'll ask it right away. Right now, what's your favorite piece of content to consume? Blog, podcast, any book, anything like that? What's your favorite piece of content?
Definitely content format would be book. I'm really one for a physical book where I can take a pen and I can write in the write in the spine all of the notes. In terms of what I am reading now, I'm going through the Marcus Aurelius Meditations again. Really classic, like stoic book. That one's there on my bookshelf at the moment.
Nice. Great recommendation. Awesome. And then next question for you, any favorite person or people to take inspiration from or follow that you'd recommend?
Yeah, from a business context, this guy taught me so much. Guy called Vern Harnish. He wrote the books, The Rockefeller Habit and then Scaling Up. I would say like they are the Bibles for any new founder. And then secondly, I would say the work of Richard Koch. He wrote the 80-20 principle. And then a second book that I really recommend that's lesser known of his is called the STAR principle. And that's really how to identify market opportunities that are what he called stars, essentially those stars that you can ride and have real success in. Really great book, that one. And a short read, it's like literally a pamphlet, but definitely recommended reading.
Nice. Awesome. Great recommendations, especially for business leaders, business founders, and anyone in kind of business roles. I love that. Awesome. And my next and last question is maybe my favorite one. Any new ideas or concept that you've recently heard or learned about that you found really fascinating, interesting, can be big or small ideas or concepts?
Yeah. I was quite intrigued hearing on a podcast the other day about like Elon's management style. I think it was Mark Andreessen that spoke about this, and it really helped me reevaluate kind of like how I'm leading and managing in the business. And the way that he essentially manages is he breaks his year down into like 52 weeks and 52 problems that he solves. conceptually, he says that as a leader or as a founder, you basically solve the problems that no one else will will have the ability or the willing to solve. You basically just clear up the shit that everyone else leaves for you, which is pretty true. It's like eating glass most of the time, being a founder. But what he does is he just basically removes the middle management. He goes straight to the source. He goes and sits with the developers on the front line and he solves a problem for a week, gets it sorted, and then he moves on to the next biggest problem in the business. And I think just removing that hierarchy that so many large organizations have, they always will just cascade it down to the middle management. You go and solve this problem. Whereas leaders, we can go straight to the source. We can solve things much faster, and we can really make sure that our business moves at a much faster rate. And I think that's a great leadership lesson that we can all adopt.
Wow, I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. James, and what is one life philosophy you like to live by?
As you just heard, I'm quite into stoicism. So yeah, one philosophy is memento mori, remember death. I actually have it tattooed on my arm somewhere here. You might see it. And every time I tell people about that tattoo, their immediate response is just, oh gosh, how morbid is that? Like just thinking about death every day. But actually just thinking about death as a reminder to live is so powerful. Remembering that we are here for a finite period of time and how we should live every day to its complete fullest. I've tried to bring that to the forefront. And rather than my other tattoo, which is Kaizen, hidden on the back of my arm where I never get to see it, I put this one on the front of my arm so I could actually remember it and be reminded about it each day. And I've tried to adopt that as much as possible.
Amazing. And James, on the weekends when you are not working, how do you like to decompress?
At the moment, it's running very long runs or lifting very heavy weights, and then typically jumping into an ice bath or a sauna to help myself recover. That seems to be pretty much the routine at the moment. But aside from that, I love to be outside. I really enjoy being in nature. I guess that comes from sort of growing up in sort of rural England. I like to be out like hiking in the mountains, in the woods. When I get the opportunity, going on snowboarding holidays and throwing myself down mountains, those types of things are where I really find peace and freedom, I think.
Nice, beautiful. And for anybody that wants to connect with you, what's the best way of doing so?
Yeah, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. So if you search me, James Reynolds, there. On the other social platforms, Instagram and others, I'm at Follow James. And yeah, if you want to find out a little bit more about what we do over at SEO Sherpa and the type of work that we do there, you can find us at SEOSherpa.com.
Beautiful, amazing. Well, James, it has been such an honor interviewing you. There has been so many gold nuggets in this conversation, and I'm sure that the listeners are going to have a lot of beautiful takeaways.
Yes, thank you, James. So great having you on. It's such a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, guys, for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We want to thank our sponsors for supporting the Success Revenue podcast. RevSetter is the #1 customer success and management platform in the Middle East region, offering global capabilities mixed with regional solutions that helps your CS, account management, and go-to-market teams 10x efficiency, improve customer experience, and turbocharge customer retention rates.
And thank you to Medlify, a leading marketplace for workers and employers in the healthcare space. Needs and demands meet, great benefits for both sides. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.